Hello and welcome. For a Palestinian woman, she leads a very unique lifestyle, one that centers around her experiences as a refugee from her homeland and the need to preserve its architecture, but one that also recognizes her people need a human face. This week on One on One, meet the award-winning Palestinian author, activist and architect, Suad Amiry. As a child, she only knew her homeland through the stories of a Palestinian refugee family. But growing up, Suad Amiry felt a piece of her life was missing. There came a voyage of self-discovery as she returned to the West Bank town of Ramallah in 1981 as a tourist, eventually making it home. 10 years later, she was on the Palestinian peace delegation looking for solutions. Around the same time, she founded the ReWalk Centre for Architectural Conservation to help preserve at least something of Palestine. Suad Amiry has also discovered the power of writing and realized that through her books, the real story of the Palestinian people can still be told. Well, Suad Amiry, it's lovely to have a chance to chat with you.
Thank you very much. I'm very happy to be here.
Good to talk with you. Now, your writings have a very personal touch to them. It's really pretty much your life story, but also the situation of your people and the situation in the Middle East through your eyes as well. And you put a very human face on it, which the mainstream media tends to miss.
Right.
You know, being very much, I guess, conflict-driven. I don't know. How important is it to put a human face on such conflict, to give the Palestinians a human face, so to speak?
Well, I think it's most important. As you said, the television is always interested in death, unfortunately. When you talk Palestine or you say Palestinians, everybody feels sad or everybody shrinks. And my books are really about everyday life. For me, occupation means that you are forbidding 3.5 million Palestinians just having a normal life. So my books are really about people who want to live, the Palestinians as a nation who want to live. And, you know, my books are about my mother-in-law, about my husband, about my dog, myself. And I think one of the most important things to relate to a nation is to see the similarities with that nation. And that's what I try to do in my books. It's just to remind people that really Palestine is about, the occupation is about forbidding people just to go to the movies, to get to school, to go to nurseries. So I think that's why my writing is more about why we want to live, and people should allow us to live and help us to live.
You say that you like to draw on your own experiences rather than construct a world.
Right.
And I mean, that means really you're drawing on all the stories you have. But when you start traveling, when you're away from, well, you're now back home, so to speak, but when you're away from that sort of area, it must be hard to get those stories.
Well, I think, you know, in my two books, Sharon and My Mother-in-Law and Nothing to Lose But Your Life, I think many people relate to them, especially people away, because when you're away, you tend to either make Palestine, romanticize Palestine, many of the Palestinians, or many of the people are scared of getting to Palestine. So my writing is about reminding people that this is a normal place where people love and die and go to school. And there is no romanticizing whatsoever in my writing. I mean, it's just like there are betrayers, there are people who love, there is a mother-in-law who's driving me crazy. And so this is what I'm trying to give the details of everyday life in Palestine.
Now, you were born in Damascus in Syria,
right?
Just a couple of years after your parents were lost their home in Palestine,
right,
and they were essentially refugees.
Right.
How much of that sense of loss permeated your early childhood?
A lot, actually. You know, my father is from Jaffa, and in 1948, my parents, my mother and my father, were living in West Jerusalem. And in 1948, they were kicked out of their home, and they went to live in Ramallah, and soon enough, we were in Jordan. I grew up in Jordan. I was born technically in Damascus because my mother was Syrian, but I grew up as a refugee in Jordan. And the loss of the homeland over there is quite strong, actually. I mean, in one of my books, I talk about going back to search for my father's house in Jaffa. And it was amazing how much childhood, you know, in a culture like the Arab culture, I'm sure in India and Pakistan and many of these countries, what your parents tell you every day lives, it's part of your memory. I was surprised how much I knew about my father's house in Jaffa. He used to describe how, as a boy, he used to go to the sea with his towel on his shoulder, he would walk, and all of these images were with me. like the diaspora, 5 million diaspora Palestinians, you carry that with you. And sometimes actually it's very tiring. I always say if we ever want compensation from the Israelis for losing our homeland, it's for that memory and that heaviness, you know. You are reminded every single moment of your life that you are a Palestinian. And that's heavy, that's heavy.
Your early years, they were interesting. You were pretty much a tomboy out there playing with the boys.
Yes, I mean, I am lucky in a way, I must say, because my mother is Syrian and I grew up in Damascus, and my mother came from a sort of relatively rich family, and we lived in a beautiful house, and I think those images have a lot of has a lot of influence on me as an architect. Now the tomboyishness is, as a little girl, I always liked to play in the street, you know, and I always wore a hat and wore shorts, and I wanted to look like a boy. And my mother always had difficulty with me because, you know, I'm off playing, but at the same time, if anybody thought I was a boy, I was be very, very disappointed.
But she encouraged you to play with the boys, didn't she?
Yes, I think I was very lucky from both my parents. I mean, my father, being Palestinian, education was very important for him. So for us, he wanted us to be all very educated. And as a result, 3 of my sisters were, you know, PhD holders. My mother was a very strong woman, a woman that did not fear anything in her life. And I think, you know, you get influence, of course, from your father. I think I was influenced by my father with his values. I think his experience as a refugee and having to make it in life gave him a strong sense of fairness. So I learned my values from my father. But the strong characters and the toughness really came from my mother. And yes, go. You know, my mother was very open-minded and, you know, play in the street, go to Damascus on your own when I was 9 years old. So I had this kind of freedom in my family that really affected me and gave me a positive outlook to life.
Now you went off to Beirut to study.
Yes.
So a change in environment there. How did you adjust to the Lebanese environment?
Actually, Lebanon was one of the important moments in my life. You know, Jordan at the end of the day is a small country compared to Lebanon. I went to Lebanon in the early 70s. And if you recall Beirut at that moment, it was a political, very active culturally, very active politically. And actually, the only time I became aware that I was Palestinian and sort of active was in Lebanon. But more important, I think in Lebanon, I was exposed to the world. I mean, the American University of Beirut had people coming from Iraq, from Yemen, from India, from name it. And I was open. You know, it's a place that made me realize that a human being is beyond your family. The world is your family. And, you know, I talked about being influenced by my father and my mother. But I think we have to always remember that who we are by accident. I mean, I don't take credit neither for my nationality nor for my religion, but I take credit, if I want to say, by what I become as life goes by. So Beirut was really a place where I learned to be a human being, a daughter of this world, and not necessarily, but at the same time, that was the time where the PLO was very active. And that was also, on the one hand, I felt very international in character, but that was also the time where I felt very Palestinian. I developed my consciousness as a Palestinian because of the PLO being in Lebanon early 70s.
Why pick architecture, though, to study architecture?
I can't tell, to tell you the truth. I mean, I can reflect on it. As I told you, being in the old city of Damascus, I'm sure you have been to Damascus, and you can see the images that Damascus leaves on you. My grandfather's house was a beautiful old house. And now when I work in conservation, I try to think maybe this left an impact on me. Later on, I wouldn't be surprised that the loss of Palestine really had an impact on me, because I grew up with my father telling us that Israel, between 1948 and 1952, demolished 420 Palestinian villages, erased them. And I always had this fear that Palestine is physically disappearing. And I think I came back to, I wasn't aware of that. I mean, later on now I think of it. Why am I working in conservation of historic Palestinian buildings? I think there is a lot of insecurities inside us that one become aware of when you grow up. I also had, my mother had a woman friend who was really, she was an interior designer. Again, she was fourth grade. I mean, she was like very educated, but she was very, very cultured. And she did a lot of interior design for King Hussein and the royal family. And I must have been impressed by her also.
It's very sad when your father passed away in 1978,
yes.
30 years after he'd been forced out of his home in Jaffa. He never got to go back and never got to see it. That really was
No, actually, my father did. I couldn't do it. I couldn't do it because in 1967, my father decided to go and see his home in Jaffa, and he made the trip actually, and he found out that there was a Jewish family, of course, living in that house, and there was a barber shop in their shop down. He knocked at the door and tried to go inside to see that house, and he couldn't, they wouldn't allow him in. My father came back. He was very, very distressed by that experience, and actually I couldn't make the trip.
So to this day, you've not had a chance to see your father's home?
I mean, I went to Palestine in '81 to teach at Beirut University. And of course, the first thing you want to do is to go to your father's house. But I just could not go through that. I never saw it. So I don't even know whether it still exists or not.
Well, you've done some remarkable things. We're going to talk about that in a minute.
Yeah.
We take a short break here. More one-on-one with Suad Amiry when we return. Welcome back. You're watching One-on-One. We're speaking with award-winning Palestinian writer and activist Suad Amiry. There was a turning point in your life when you decided in 1981 to go to Ramallah. It's where you actually met the man you ended up marrying.
Right,
Salim.
right.
How was the adjustment going back to essentially your homeland?
Right. Well, it's quite an interesting experience, actually, because, as I said, I grew up outside of Palestine, and, you know, you live on stories, you live on images. And really, one day I just woke up and decided I'm going to go to Palestine and teach at Beirut University. And my mother, of course, thought I was totally crazy. And she tells me everybody runs from occupation, and here you are going to live under occupation. I went to Palestine, and I must say I didn't know it. Of course, I took a car and drove everywhere. I must say that it was very beautiful, and still I find it very beautiful. Of course, I had a very strong sense of being a stranger. And you know, especially if you go to Jaffa or to go to historic Palestine for a Palestinian, it's very, very painful because you don't recognize the place. You don't know what language to speak when you're in Haifa or in Jaffa. It's a place that makes you feel very, very, very sad.
It was a political decision, not just connecting with your roots, wasn't it, to go to Ramallah?
It was sort of really wanting to be in Palestine, because it's very harsh to be away from Palestine. You know, I see my sister who's in America, or I see my sister in Jordan, and Palestinians in diaspora. I think one of the most problematic things in life is to have that yearning for a place. And I decided it's better to be in that place with all its difficulties, even under the difficult Israeli occupation. I'd rather be in the midst of it than being outside and sort of romantic.
Tell me about your time when you came to Washington in the early 90s as part of the Palestinian peace delegation.
Yes, well, that was a great experience for me, because I did spend a lot of my life trying to really explain to the Israelis why the Palestinians want to have a state. I mean, listen, I'm from Jaffa, and it's a big, big, big compromise to anybody from Jaffa to tell you I accept a two-state solution. And for me, this is the saddest thing about the Israelis. The Israelis don't realize how much concession we have made to recognize them, to accept them. But at the end of the day, you realize that they haven't accepted us. When you are in the negotiations, you realize how unserious the Israelis are about negotiating with us. because they would come into the room, waste time of calling Yehuda and Samira instead of calling it the occupied. We will spend a whole session saying, no, this is the occupied territories. They would say, no, this is not occupied territories. And they would go on and on and on. And we realize, I mean, really, I realize that many times the Israelis just want to be in the negotiations to gain time.
When your mother passed away in 2005, I know you were very sad. She'd never had a chance to visit your home in Ramallah.
Right.
She wouldn't go to the occupied territories, would she?
No, my mother was very Syrian in that respect. What I mean by that, you know, many of the Arabs, first of all, you have to realize technically it's impossible for the Arabs to arrive to the West Bank. I mean, you need a permit to the Israelis. Now, the Israelis don't give any permits, not even to the Jordanians with whom they have made peace. And of course, it was very sad for me to have my mother pass away and not to see my home in Ramallah. She never visited me in my home.
Did you get a chance to read your first book, Sharon and My Mother-in-Law?
Oh, yes.
It had just come out soon.
It has just come out. And my mother-in-law, the book was about her.
How did she react? The story's interesting, isn't it? It's all about emails exchanged when you were stuck in...
Yeah. Well, it all happened when the Israelis attacked occupied Ramallah in 2002 and 2003. And my mother-in-law, who was 91 years old at that time, came to stay with me. And the Israelis put us under curfew for 41 days consecutively. And I always tell the Israelis, I may forgive you one day for occupying us, but I will never forgive you for having my mother-in-law stay with me for 42 days. At that time, really, it was very tough to have the Israeli army outside the house and to have my mother-in-law inside the house. So at the end of the day, I started writing emails to friends describing what it means to have my mother-in-law. We were fighting on every little detail at home. At the same time, you have the Israeli tanks literally outside the garden.
Did she ever speak to you again after that?
Actually, she was very cute about it because the reporters will come to her and she would tell me, what is it all about? And I say, remember how the good time we had together? She says, yeah.
It was a bestseller as well. It was translated, 17 languages now?
19.
19 languages now. Amazing.
And Arabic was the last one, actually. But
really?
Yes, yeah.
What was the reaction from people around the world reading this exchange?
You'll be surprised. This book has been there since 2003 in Italy. Every single day, I receive a reaction from somebody, either an email or somebody. And the best reaction was from the Palestinian community, actually, because I was scared when the book would come in Arabic. Because, Palestine is sacred and Palestine has to be put in big words. And here I am making fun of my dog. There is a story in the book where I am using the passport. There is a health passport of my dog. I take that health passport and I put my photograph on that passport and start going through checkpoints with the dog's passport, And when the Israeli checkpoints stop me and try to figure out what's this crazy woman doing, and then I say, this is my dog. He's from Jerusalem. She doesn't know how to drive the car on her own, and I am her driver. And so there were a lot of, making fun of the situation, how difficult it is. And I was afraid that maybe the Palestinians will miss the point, but no, I think that they were very encouraging.
Of course, in 2010, your book, Nothing to Lose But Your Life, was an interesting one, because for that, you became a man and went on a rather dangerous journey.
Yes. Actually, that book really changed my life, because that book is about the Palestinian workers. Many people don't realize, really, if you ask me about the conflict of Palestine and Israel today, I will tell you it's an economic conflict. The Israelis, unfortunately, are trying very hard to make us very poor and very uneducated, and the circumstances are difficult. I had a worker come to work in my garden. His name is Murad. Murad is only 21 years old, and he started telling me what it means to try to get a job as a worker in Israel after the wall has been constructed. And he told me things, as a Palestinian living in Ramallah, I couldn't imagine that 150,000 of our people are going through this. So I decided, okay, I'm going to join them. And the only way to join these Palestinian workers is to be a man myself. And of course I was scared, because I would read the newspaper every day, and then I would find that the Israelis have shot dead or injured some of the Palestinian workers. To make a long story short, I decided I'm joining them. So yes, I took my hair up, I put a hat, I put on eyeglasses, and I wore jeans and part of my husband's clothes, and I accompanied the workers. But at the end of the day, only 4 of us made it to Israel, and the rest were arrested by the Israeli soldiers. Now, this trip was very traumatic for me to realize this is what happens to the Palestinian workers day in and day out.
One thing you have done very much to try to help Palestinians is set up the ReWalk Centre for Architectural Conservation, and that was in 1991 to basically preserve Palestinian architectural heritage. How much success have you had with that, considering how much damage has been done?
Well, it has been successful in spite of the difficulties. I mean, ReWalk is an NGO that was started in '91, and the idea is really to create jobs. Again, I mean, maybe in Britain or in Europe, in Italy, you can preserve a building because of its historic value. In Palestine, we always have to tie conservation with job creation. And we have created a very successful program in which we work in the villages, we renovate historic buildings, but we try to make a job creation. The contractor has to hire people from the village, but also we have created cultural centers. We look at architecture not only as stones, but we look at it as an economic, cultural, and social development. And I think we have succeeded in doing that, in making that combination. And we have worked almost in 100 villages. We have documented, we have a lot of documentation about historic buildings. And as you know, Palestine has a meaning for every person all over the world. So we always feel a responsibility that we need to protect that cultural heritage for the sake of humanity, not only for us Palestinians.
Considering how much you've traveled and the way your family is spread out across the world, where do you consider home now?
You know, you're like a tree. Mediterranean, I can see the Mediterranean as an area is home for me. But at the end of the day, until the day of liberation, I think it's very difficult to say except for Palestine. Maybe the day we have a free Palestine, maybe my mind would allow me to be, to consider home other places.
How would you like to be remembered? What would you like your legacy to be?
As a person who tries very, very, very hard to keep my values in spite of the difficulties in which we live through.
Suad Amiry, I wish you luck. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.